Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Cameron English, Director of Biosciences at the American Council on Science and Health, with you as always. We have a special episode today. We're joined by Dr. Ronit Liv. And Ronit, you have a fascinating backstory. Your expertise is drugs, and that's what we're going to talk about. And of course, you're an ER physician. So I want to get some background on the work that you've done so people sort of understand who they're talking to as we go through this topic.
Well, thank you, Cameron. It's really an honor to be on your podcast. I am an emergency physician for, now it's embarrassing to say, like when you're over 30 years, because he sounds so old, but I guess I'm that old, practicing on the front lines and still do that today. I also got my board certification in addiction medicine, and I had the unique and really honor to serve as the first chief medical officer at the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy.
All right. Well, thank you. And the reason I wanted you to do that is because I'm pretty sure we're going to slay a sacred cow to a lot of people as we go on. And you did an interview with my colleague, Dr. Josh Bloom, which people can read at our website, acsh.org. And it was all about the health effects of marijuana. And I did not know this, and I don't think a lot of people do, but you can, I guess the technical term would be cannabis poisoning, but effectively you can overdose on marijuana. And a lot of people don't know that. I think popular culture and maybe even some people in science and medicine have made the case that marijuana is relatively safe. So let's start there. I mean, a lot of people don't know that.
You are right. And the proof of that is all the patients I see in the emergency department, because these are not bad people. They just have no idea. And all they hear all around them that it's, natural, it's a plant, it's safe, it's legal. And that just leads to more business for me in the emergency department. People rarely overdose. I don't know if I use the word overdose because that's misleading. People think of overdose when the overdose on fentanyl and you could almost die, right? So I call it marijuana poisonings, and there's just a whole litany of ailments that brings people in the emergency department. There's not a day that goes by. I worked late last night. I wasn't sure if I'd be awake and bright and cheery for your podcast, but I am. And sure enough, at least several patients that I saw last night with marijuana poisoning.
So walk us through, I don't know if there's a typical example, but these cases that you see, what sort of symptoms are they experiencing? You talk about two really scary sounding things in the interview. So the first is cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. I think I pronounced that correctly, I hope. And then, tell us about that.
I'll tell you about that one. And it is hard to pronounce. And that's why we have a new name for it called scromiting.
Okay.
Cannabis hyperemesis syndrome is throwing up, violent abdominal pain. Really, it's a miserable disease caused by chronic, usually smoked, although it can happen in edibles, users. And this is not the occasional weekend user. These are people who've been using regularly for years, and their cannabinoid receptors go haywire and act in an idiosyncratic way, in an opposite way. We saw that same phenomenon in emergency departments, in medicine in general, with opioid hyperalgesia, right? People who are using very high dose opioids, and they would have a worse pain response. And how could that be? They're taking pain medicines, but they were taking them on high doses for so many years that they were getting the opposite effect. And that's what we're seeing with cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which is impossible to pronounce. And that's why we call it scromiting, screaming and vomiting. And when I tell patients they have cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, they're like, you don't know what you're talking about, doc. But if I say they're scromiting and just go look it up, they think about that and they say, I guess I am. And that verbiage helps me actually get patients to accept what's happening to them.
Yeah, it's always a good idea to doubt the the knowledge of the physician who's treating you.
You'd be
That's funny.
surprised. Some people believe they're a bud tender over the emergency physician.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's dive into a couple other specifics. So one of the points that you made in the interview that you did with Dr. Bloom was that, or I guess he brought this up to you, is that you have chronic pain patients who are being denied access to opioids. And he's been really, really vocal about the fact that this is tragic. You know, people are driven to suicide. They're driven to illicit drug use, and it destroys their lives in many cases. But at the same time that that's happening, you have the marijuana industry selling these products you're talking about. And from what I understand, they're totally unregulated by the FDA at this point. And of course, you have many states liberalizing their drug laws. And so on the one hand, you have the federal government coming down with a heavy hammer on a lot of people and restricting their access to medications that they do need. And at the same time, you have people running around just willy-nilly with access to marijuana that's much stronger than anything, say our parents would have had access to. So talk a little bit about that dichotomy, because it is kind of troubling.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yes.
First of all, I know Josh Bloom has a following of people who've suffered injustice because of the opioid crisis. And really, my heart goes out to those people because it is an injustice. You can't get people, addicted or dependent on opioids and then cut them off. Right? That's not okay. And there are guidelines in tapering and keeping people safe. And I've spoke to several survivors and family members of people who did take their life because they were cut off from opioids and didn't see any way out. And, it's unacceptable. And you're right. Opioids are regulated with, a hard hammer by the FDA. Really scared the medical community into prescribing. I mean, because I also know physicians who, are been threatened to lose their license. 500 doctors in the state of California received letters accusing them for overprescribing opioids from 2014, way before the CDC guidelines came out, scared the entire medical community in California, probably the rest of the United States, in prescribing. So just so the listeners understand the other side, it's not just, bad doctors prescribing. We were told as a medical community we have to prescribe, and not just doctors cutting off because we've been threatened of losing license for prescribing. So I always say prescribing you have to do that in the Goldilocks method, not too much, not too little. It has to be just right. So that's on the opioid end. And on the other end, marijuana has been declared a medicine. The word medicine has been hijacked. I mean, for me to prescribe antibiotics, aspirin, anything, I have to go through this medical standard of care. I have to do a history, a physical exam, check vital signs, check for drug interactions, and make sure that that's safe before I risk my license by making such a drug or procedure recommendation. And there's none of that standard of medical care in calling marijuana a drug, a medicine. I'd rather have it be recreational. At least everybody understands that, rather than pretending it's a medicine.
Sure. I don't think anyone refers to a cocktail as therapeutic in any technical medical sense. But I don't know why marijuana just seems to get this pass. But you say, and elaborate on this, because it's a pretty strong statement. I believe you said in the interview that the marijuana industry preys on people with chronic pain and leads them from opioids to pot. So elaborate on that. What are you saying there?
So like you mentioned, there's treating pain has been an issue, and people have been cut up from opioids. Doctors know that they're under scrutiny for any prescription that they write. So on the one hand, on the medical community, they'll say, I can't give you opioids if you need to, go ahead and use marijuana. There's no record of that, right? That doesn't go under your DA license to say, okay, you can use marijuana. That's on one end. And then if you look at all the marketing, and if you ask people who have a medical marijuana card, what's the number one reason they have that card? The number one reason is pain. Although the studies for THC and pain efficacy, don't show that effect. As a matter of fact, people who are chronic marijuana users who suffer pain have less pain self-efficacy than people who don't, and have more opioid use rather than less in treating their pain.
That's so fascinating because I have someone who's close to me who suffered a serious injury last year, and the doctor gave them, small prescription for opioids, but everyone in their family was paranoid about this person using the prescribed drug, and someone got them, I don't know if it was gummy bears, but some kind of THC laced snack food. And my thought was, take what the doctor gave you. That's what they do.
What's going to happen with someone like that is they'll end up taking both.
And that's the trouble.
Right. They'll end up taking both, and then the opioid's not enough, and then the THC is not enough, and then you get into a problem.
Yeah, maybe that goes to the fact that people have been told a story about opioids, which isn't 100% incorrect. I mean, they can be addictive and they can be very dangerous. But people have this perception that, if you take these, there's really no justification, and it's been forced on us by drug companies, this and that. But, this pot stuff is way safer. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, about how our culture has sort of inculcated these ideas in us.
What's even more ironic, it's the same industry, right? It's the same big pharma that's now big marijuana. It's the same concept, and it just gets better each time, right? We used to have big tobacco, and then we got big pharma with opioids, and now big marijuana. And it's the same talking points, same type of marketing, same CEOs and executives who are pushing this, and they get kind of better at their job each time. And that's why I speak out. I just want people to know the facts and make their own decision. I'm not telling people not to use weed, not to take their gummy. I'm just saying, do it with your eyes wide open. Understand the risk. There's risks of addiction. If you're going to do the opioid pill like your friend and the marijuana gummy bear, I refer people to drugs.com. Look it up yourself. Don't listen to me. Do the calculation. Put in all your medications in their drug interaction checker. Then add cannabis for marijuana or cannabidiol, and see what drug interactions come up, and then know the risks. And people don't know this. A lot of the people in the medical community don't know this as well. I did a study in San Diego with 17 different pharmacies. We gave out 2,000 info cards on drug interactions, and it had a little QR code so people can answer a survey. Of course, not many people answer surveys, but those that did answer the survey, 90% of them wanted this information. Even those who self-admitted using marijuana thought that information on drug interactions is important. Some drug interactions, marijuana and opioids has a drug interaction. Marijuana, both cannabis and CBD have drug interactions with a lot of antidepressants, but there can be lethal drug interactions. People who are on blood thinners and use cannabis can die, can bleed to death. And it's, as weird as that sounds, I had a patient who came in 3 times to the hospital with internal bleeding. Each time he needs blood transfusions, endoscopy, and the third time I kind of figured it out. And he says, oh yeah, I'm a product of the 60s. I've been smoking all the time. It's never been a problem. It's never been a problem till you got all these heart stents and you need blood thinners to keep those patent and open, but the two don't go together.
It's funny you bring up the tobacco industry and of course big pharma. because the talking points you hear about this, and again, they're not always incorrect, but the tobacco industry, they denied the potential risk of smoking and lung cancer. They denied that association, or they tried to cover it up for as long as they could. And then with Big Pharma, right, they made these super potent drugs and they got doctors to prescribe them to their patients. And now they have this dedicated customer base, this and that. And with marijuana, it seems that more or less the same thing has happened, because over the years, they've developed these increasingly potent strains of this plant. And it seems that people are really unaware of that. So can you talk a little bit about how these products came to be that can be so powerful?
Yeah. So yeah, and first of all, you're right. The pattern is, sell the drug as something healthy, deny any bad reaction, and then milk the system until you have some lawsuits. So we're on the same pattern because the industry is denying the psychosis and suicide and all these other things that we are seeing. And it's just a matter of time for the lawsuits. We'll see if that happens in my lifetime or not. But you're right on how the potency is different. I think part of the reason people don't realize that marijuana is so bad is especially for older adults who now their kids may be using marijuana, as they remember the marijuana of their youth. The plant that they grew in their backyard and rolled into a joint. That THC, that plant doesn't even exist anymore in the United States. That used to be 3% THC. That plant has been genetically modified now to California would be like an average of 25% THC. It's a completely different cousin from the initial plant. And if you walk into a marijuana dispensary, which I did for one of my podcasts, while the plant is the most popular product, if you ask the shops, the dispensaries, they have all sorts of brand new products that's pure THC, dabs and shatters and oils and these concentrates. That is high potent, up to 90 or even more percent THC, very different than the plant of the 60s or 70s or even the 80s.
Yeah, it's incredible. I'm a pretty boring Baptist these days. I don't use any drugs. I got a new kid that I'm responsible for and all that.
Aww.
But I remember. Thank you very much. It's the best. But I remember a few years ago, because I'm in California where marijuana is legal, and I must have had half of a Rice Krispie treat or something, and I was high for like a day and a half. And it was the strangest feeling in the world, and it sort of contradicted the experience that I was always told by the movies. This and that. It's not addictive. It wears off pretty quickly. It's not like being drunk. And it was a crazy experience. And so I bring that up to go back to the regulatory side for just a second. I've seen that the FDA will clamp down on dispensaries if they make unsubstantiated medical claims. Like if you take this, it'll treat this condition, or it'll alleviate the symptom. But other than that, there's been really nothing, as far as I can tell. They haven't really done anything. So I'm wondering what's going on. And with tobacco, for example, the FDA is very, very stern, even with something like electronic cigarettes, which the research shows are much safer than combustible tobacco. They're still very critical of the use of products like that. But on this, which seems, based on what you're telling me, it seems far more dangerous. I just don't understand what's going on. Can you speak to, I don't know if the politics is the right word, but the regulatory environment right now? What's going on?
So when I was at the White House and talking to the FDA, I asked that question: why aren't we doing more to protect the consumers about THC and marijuana? And the answer was a circulatory answer. It's federally illegal. So how can we regulate something that's federally illegal? And they would say for CBD, on the other hand, that's not federally illegal. They'll say, oh, well, we send, anytime you have a medical claim, if you see any marketing of medical claims, the FDA has a form. You can go to that to that form, fill out a complaint, and they probably, I don't know how many hundreds of these that they get, because we see them everywhere we go. I don't know how many people fill out the form to report them, and then every once in a while they slap somebody's hand with a letter saying, don't do that anymore. But it pays to not tell the truth. As far as California goes, California marijuana is legal, and there is a California Cannabis Consumer Bureau that monitors legal dispensaries, and several problems. Probably for every legal dispensary, there's, I don't know, several, I don't know how many exactly, I don't know, a handful of illegal dispensaries. So it's very hard for people to know what's what, where they're getting their stuff from, and they have to make sure they're getting at a legal dispensary. I do believe that it's probably safer there than at an illegal dispensary. But even that is very poorly regulated. So for example, in a study from UC Davis, they went to 20 different marijuana dispensaries, bought flour from all 20 products, and see what contaminants they had. Out of all 20 dispensaries, every single one of them had some type of infection that's in that plant: E. coli, aspergillus, Klebsiella, lots of different funguses. Which is why I tell pain patients, if I have friends also like maybe have cancer and they don't want to use those terrible opioids for pain, and I'll tell them, please use the opioids. Don't use the cannabis products that we know have fungal contamination, and you're an immunocompromised patient. As a matter of fact, the CDC has put out a bulletin alerting people who are immunocompromised, especially transplant patients, not to use cannabis products, especially smoked products, because of the high association with infection. The other, there was a study also in California that reviewed all the legal dispensaries and showed that a large percentage of them were marketing to children and were not following the rules that were set by the industry. And I don't think the consequences of not following their own guidelines is severe enough.
So, okay, so just real quick, I want to make sure I understand this. So the FDA's logic is, if we start to come down on these dispensaries, on the industry at large, then we're sort of conceding that we lost the drug war. So is that what they're saying? I don't.
First of all, I can't speak for the FDA. I'm not the FDA.
Sure.
But but they're regulatory agencies. They're there to follow rules.
All right. Okay.
I mean, governments follow rules. That's their job. It's not that they're saying we're not following the rules. They're saying, and I'm not fair to speak for them, but these rules don't apply to in our lane.
I see. Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to put you in a position where you had to know the mind of of this giant hive mind in Washington. I apologize for that. Okay. Well, as we wrap up, I mean, maybe you can speak more generally to the risk of addiction, because again, my understanding from reading Dr. Bloom's work is that opioid addiction, I should say, it's actually pretty rare in people who are prescribed the drugs. Like they get in a serious car accident and they need. I
don't think that that's true. I think.
Really?
Yeah. No. I think CDC says that if you are a chronic user of opioids, you continue using them, there's 100% chance of becoming dependent and getting tolerant from that. So if you use it regularly, and so I studied, but the way I got into addiction medicine is at the beginning of the opioid crisis, when people were saying, you guys are prescribing, people are dying from your prescriptions. And I was one of those people prescribing opioids. That's what I was taught. That was the beginning of my career. We were taught not to judge people. And then I was told by parents who lost their children to opioid addiction that you guys are prescribing too much. And I went to the medical examiner and looked at every single person who died from a medication and compared that to their prescriptions. And the people who died, you can't tell if they The common denominator was not whether they had a car accident and they had pain, or they were, abusing and they needed opioids. It was dose related, right? So it doesn't matter why you have the pain. It's the dose and that leads to death. Okay. What leads to addiction is chronic use. And the same thing with cannabis. So you're asking what is the chances of addiction in marijuana? Well, the younger you are when you start using marijuana, and the more potent the drug is, and the more frequent that you use, the more chance of addiction. So overall, for adults in the United States, 9% will develop a cannabis use disorder or addiction, but 17% of young adults, people whose brain is still growing. The brain is still growing to age 25. So your chances of addiction is much higher if you start any drug, tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, any drug, opioids. If you start using those kind of drugs before your brain is done growing, which is age 25, that's the science age, you'll have more chance of having an addiction. And for marijuana overall in the United States, it's 17%. But if you're a daily user, especially starting at a young age, the chance of addiction could go up to 50%.
Okay, so then the takeaway seems to be, as you said earlier, you need to approach this with your eyes open. You need to inform yourself and know what you're getting into, what risks you face if you decide to use really any of these substances. Would that be a fair assessment of what people need to do before they start using any of this stuff?
Yeah, I think, I would say number one, protect your brain, and your brain is growing until age 25. And so you want to fill that brain with lots of good, healthy stuff and pathways that, with athletics or music or, whatever your love and passion is, rather than any drug that can stunt the growth of your brain, including marijuana. So I think that's one message, protection. And the other one, if you decide to experiment or use, or you feel that it's helpful for you, I'm not telling people not to use, but, if you are using other medications, check for drug interactions. And I think the risk that we didn't talk about, that I see probably more common than anything in the emergency department, is psychosis. And understanding that THC is a risk factor for psychosis and episodes of psychosis. And I don't know if that's what happened to you when you had the Rice Krispie, but if you continue doing that, that can result in permanent schizophrenia.
Oh, wow.
So
Boy.
It's kind of like not everybody who smokes cigarettes gets lung cancer and emphysema, right? But we know that tobacco is an independent risk factor for emphysema and lung cancer. So not everybody who uses marijuana develops schizophrenia or psychosis, but that is a definite association with, lots of articles and what's called the Bradford Hill criteria, showing the direct association and causation of cannabis and psychosis. The Bradford Hill criteria was used with the tobacco industry because the tobacco industry said, who said that our tobacco is causing cancer? We don't know that. No one dies of one puff of smoke. It's safe. And so it took years of literature that was put together to show that there is actually not just an association with tobacco and lung problems, but a direct causation. And the same principles of the Bradford Hill criteria have been applied to cannabis and psychosis. And that's really, there's undisputed, some industry will dispute it, but there's a lot of science that backs that up.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so you are a podcaster in your own right, and I think that would probably be a good place for folks to start if they want to learn more about this topic. So tell us about your show and what you talk about there.
Yeah, so two sources for people who want to look at the medical effects on marijuana from published medical literature, and that's isaac1.org, the International Academy on Science and Impact of Cannabis, IASIC1.org. There's a medical library that I kind of put together that helps me, when I keep track of all these, hundreds of articles. It doesn't publish all of them, but some key findings are in there. And then for people who want to hear me talk to various people, including Josh Bloom, and that's how we got connected. He was on my podcast. You go to hightruths.com. And High Truths on Drugs and Addiction. It's available on Apple, Spotify, Google, and various places.
Very good. Well, I hope everyone will start listening. I just followed the show this morning on Spotify, so I'm going to start boning up. It looks like a fascinating show that you do there. Okay. Well, Dr. Ronit Lev, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, as always, for listening. Everybody out there, if you want to get the articles that we talk about on the show, you just go to our website. It's acsh.org. You go up to the top and click the subscribe button, punch in your email address, and you'll get all this content in your inbox. So when you show up for the episodes, you'll go, oh yeah, I know what they're talking about because I read that article. All right. Well, we will have to have you back at some point, I think, because this is obviously we're not going to cover everything in 30 minutes, but I think people need to learn more about this. But again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you all next week.